Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Mr. Vice President, I'm going off script again, I know, but I just want to personally thank you. We've been through some stuff. We've gone through some of the most complex military operations this country's ever conducted, and your steady hand and your leadership during those was a great source of strength for me. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your character. Thank you for your selfless service. Thank you for commitment. Thank you for being a mentor to me, Mr. Vice President.
It's called the swamp. And you know what happened? And you know what I did? A big favor. I caught the swamp. I caught them all. Let's see what happens. Nobody else could have done that but me. I caught all of this corruption that was going on, and nobody else could have done it. Did I get that one right? Every 4 years, we gather on these steps to carry out the orderly and peaceful transfer of power. Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning, because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C., and giving it back to you, the people. For too long, a small group in our nation's capital has reaped the rewards of government, while the people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. From this day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first.
This is a president of the United States who is a danger to the republic.
America first.
He knows he's an illegitimate president.
The oath of office I take today is an oath of allegiance to all Americans.
The great Trump recovery.
America will never be a socialist country. I will fight for you with every breath in my body.
Russia, Russian, pro-Russian, Russian, Russia, Russian, 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 the Russians. Russian.
Russia, Russia, Russia.
And I will never, ever let you down.
A dangerous virus is spreading rapidly in China, and U.S. officials are very worried that it could come here.
This is really the worst attack we've ever had. This is worse than Pearl Harbor. This is worse than the World Trade Center. There's never been an attack like this.
The time for empty talk is over. Now arrives the hour of action. What they're doing is using COVID to steal an election. Together, we will make America strong again. You know what it's about? Fraud, fake ballots. We will make America wealthy again. They are trying to steal the election.
Now, under the leadership of President Trump, we are fully realizing President Kennedy's prescient view of Special Operations Forces.
We will make America proud again. And watch, please, those mail-in ballots. We will make America safe again. And in millions and millions of ballots, their vote is under what they thought they needed. They're dumping more ballots in there, okay? And yes, together, we will make America great again. Thank you. God bless you. If we are right about the fraud, Joe Biden can't be president.
Congress, the chair declares the joint session dissolved.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Saturday edition of the Devolution Power Hour. And full disclosure, this is a pre-recorded episode. As you can tell by the lights in my background, I'm in Lakeland, Florida. Got that meetup tonight. Chris, unfortunately, you will not be at the meetup, but I still get to hang out with you a little bit this afternoon. How you doing, man?
That's almost the same. I'm doing all right.
Yeah. Or how are the horrors this evening or afternoon?
I mean, I guess they persist. I haven't experienced any yet today, but that's usually like a later in the day kind of thing.
Gotcha. Well, that's good. That's good. I'm not sure if this will quite be our typical full-length episode tonight. One, because we don't have the rants, and two, because I do got to get to that meetup here later. But there's still some interesting things to talk about. We'll get through some of the Iran stuff, some interesting Peter Thiel things, some SCOTUS rulings, and we'll just kind of wing it from there. But before we do any of that, got to get a quick word from the sponsors of today's show. And first up, we got CB Distillery. If you're still tossing and turning all night and feeling edgy during the day, let me tell you about CBD from CB Distillery. Millions are turning to their CBD for relief because it works. In fact, over 90% of customers report better sleep with CBD. And it's not just sleep. CB Distillery offers targeted formulations for just about everything: sleep, stress, mood, focus, pain after exercise. They even have CBD for your pets. And it's all made with the highest quality clean ingredients with no fillers, just premium CBD. My personal favorite is the sleep one. I can vouch for it. It works. And with over 2 million satisfied customers who can also vouch for their products and 100% money back guarantee, CB Distillery is the source that you can trust. So if you're struggling with sleep, stress, or any other health concern and you haven't found relief yet, make the change like millions are to CBD from CB Distillery. And for a limited time, you can save 25% off your entire purchase. Visit cbdistillery.com and use promo code JOHN, J-O-N. That's cbdistillery.com, promo code JOHN. Specific product availability depends on individual state regulations. I believe there are 3 states that are kind of gay and don't allow you to buy CBD, which is so weird. Next up, we got a little Save Pulse. Today's show is also sponsored by Save Pulse. Save Pulse is dedicated to keeping you and your family healthy with top quality medications like amoxicillin, azithromycin, ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine at unbeatable prices. The streamlined ordering process makes it easy to stock up on all your health essentials. And now with exciting news about fenbendazole showing promise in cancer research, they proudly offer this alongside antibiotics and other viral care meds. Don't wait. Prepare for any health scenario today. Get your supply and stay ahead of the curve with Save Pulse. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/meds. Use promo code SAVEHEALTH at checkout to get 20% off on any order over $100. All right, man. The last time we talked, or we did the show, was last Saturday.
Yep.
It was right after the bombing of Iran. The United States bombed. Trump was the one who disclosed that post on True Social. He came out and did the briefest press conference I've ever seen that man give. And there was no jokes. There was no ad-libbing. He just came out, read a statement, and he walked off. And I thought we had a pretty good show. We discussed a lot of different things surrounding this entire conflict. And a full week later now, we have what looks like, or what we're told, is peace in the Middle East. We've got them a ceasefire.
Yeah, it seems like it could go that direction. And I thought it was interesting all week. You know, Steve Bannon was basically narrating that side of the story and was providing a direct contrast to the Fox News, the neocon, the Israeli establishment story that wants to push for these forever wars, as it always has in the past. And that's part of the neoconservative thing. You know, neoconservatism is downstream from Trotsky, and Trotsky's whole thing was revolution everywhere all the time. And modern day neoconservatism has its roots in that. And it's basically just revolution everywhere all the time, using the military to accomplish those goals so that they can overthrow these countries. And of course, then they do the color revolutions within the country to destabilize society and create this illusion that the military from the United States and from the global regime is actually backing up a true populist movement in those countries. And so they've been aiming for forever wars. There's a color revolution happening in Israel. There's one happening in Iran. And of course, you know, Trump is staving off one here. But yeah, it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to accomplish their additional goals, which were regime change, at least in Iran. And I suspect in Israel as well. And so it doesn't seem like any of that's going to happen. Trump took the bombing run, got the narrative win, destroyed the nuclear narrative, and now we have the opportunity to move past all of it, it seems.
Do you think Trump, I mean, he campaigned on America First ideology, and the neoconservatism, I mean, it's very much like interventionism anywhere and everywhere all the time. Very pro-Israel, that group too. I don't know if it's the ties to them, but even just like if you go on Google and look up what neoconservatism is, like they say in one of their traits is that they have strong ties and advocations for Israel, which is interesting. But with Trump and what he's doing here, do you think we will see the death of those individuals in terms, not the actual physical death, but like the death of that ideology as a whole? Because it kind of conflicts with what Trump is trying to do.
It definitely conflicts with what Trump's trying to do. I don't know that that's an ideology that can be destroyed. I mean, underneath that is the grand vision of Zionism that's been passed down since the late 1800s through the Rothschilds and through all of the systems of power in this world. And, you know, it's important to distinguish, and I think we touched on this last week, but that there are Jews who are anti-Zionist. Zionism is not something inherent in Judaism, and anti-Zionist Jews would argue that it's actually an inversion of Judaism. And then you have the aspect where, you know, a lot of people, for good reason, Arthur Kessler goes into this in the 13th Tribe, doesn't believe that a lot of these people are actually Jewish in the first place. And so, you know, it's important to be able to detach that thing, because all of the backlash comes from going after Jews and being quote unquote anti-Semitic, but that's not even what it is. It is a resistance against the Zionist world order, and it is a global order that they've been working towards. So I don't know that that ideology can ever fully go away, but it can certainly be pushed to the margins and put on the back burner so that it's not the driving force in the world. And I think that we're headed that direction because people are finding out what the roots of this movement actually are.
Yeah, I mean, that's what with all things, you expose it enough and to wake people up to what is really behind the, you know, the ideology. Even if it doesn't go away, at least it won't gain prominence any further. But a lot of what we talked about on the last Saturday and what you just said there is, you know, Trump got his narrative win, and he took away the narrative of the nuclear threat, even though they're trying to kind of revive it a little bit. There's been one of the most interesting things this last week has been the conflict between the Trump administration and the intel committees and the media about, you know, did we actually destroy these sites or not? And, you know, the whole the leaker, we should talk about that at some point too. But before we, you know, have a full discussion about the narrative stuff, we should talk about what Bannon said, because this is very much in line with what we've been saying. The narrative MacGuffin. I just love that word. But this is what he said the other day on his show.
The nuclear weapons entire program was a MacGuffin. Now you say, well, Steve, what's a MacGuffin? MacGuffin's a plot device, particularly in the classic age of Hollywood, particularly in the 30s. The MacGuffin is a plot device that drives the narrative forward in the story, but has no real meaning in reality. Now, what I mean by that, a couple of classic examples are the Maltese Falcon, the Falcon itself, and let's take Casablanca, the papers, the signed papers, because obviously the Germans didn't want you to go, didn't go. So it had no meaning in reality, but in the movie, it drives all the action. That's a MacGuffin. A MacGuffin is the Maltese Falcon. The entire nuclear weapons thing, because you're seeing it right now. We destroyed it in one turn. And not just that, the Mossad, and if you go to Citizens Free Press, Citizen Kane's got great links to all these stories. The Mossad put out one of the most detailed stories of Mossad operations they've ever put out about how they so infiltrated every aspect of Iran to kill these nuclear scientists everywhere. The story is kind of a self-owned. This is the head of Mossad told it, because you know what's missing in the story? A smoking gun. Like, where is the exact thing that you said had to be so urgent that we had to bomb 2 Thursdays ago? You know why? It's a MacGuffin. Jack Posobiec.
It's kind of, it almost makes you think he's been watching you, Chris. Like,
well,
does it even exist?
That would be him watching me watching him.
Inception of some kind of inception.
I mean, man, I make no bones about it. A lot of my thinking is downstream from Steve Bannon because I listen to him and I really pay great attention to the things he says relative to what's being said by mainstream Con Inc. GOP establishment media. And I pick up on those points and you can see, I mean, I think that it's basically unquestionable, although of course people do question it for whatever reasons. Bannon is kind of the philosophical and ideological root of MAGA. You know, his thinking informs Trump's thinking and vice versa. He had an interesting clip, I think it was maybe yesterday, talking about how, you know, the MAGA supporters might not like everything that Donald Trump's doing. They might not like this or that, but Trump has a way that he's going to go about it. He's very effective in those things. We're not going to like absolutely everything, but we stay on board. I think that he has been dead on for 5 years, and I've paid attention to him for that long. Not every show at this point, but there, you know, from the end of 2020 through maybe the end of 2023 or the middle of 2024, I was listening to every episode. And so I think that I understand the man's thinking pretty well and the perspective pretty well and how he advances these plot lines along. You know, if we take all the actuals out of this and we think only about narratives advancing, whether on Fox News, directly from Trump, from Steve Bannon, or from whoever else, he's the most MAGA person by far in any sort of major media. And then the other thing is he'll point, he'll have these kind of foundational beliefs like take down the CCP, right? It says it in the theme song to War Room. And they've been anti-CCP this whole time because they need, I believe that we need some of these enemies to go against to kind of frame what's happening in the world. But as we go along, then the image of the enemy is kind of diminished over time, the way it was with Putin in Russia. I think the same thing's going to, same thing happened with Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. I think we're going to see the same thing when it comes to Kim Jong-un. I think we're seeing it with the Ayatollah. I think we're going to see it in Venezuela eventually. There's a narrative come down on all of these things. And I think that we can see that in operation as we watch him covering the Iran and Israel scenario over the last couple of weeks. I guess that was kind of a long-winded answer.
No, that was great. And Bannon, especially, his ties going back to my part 23, when, that's when I first really, it clicked for me with Rich Higgins' memo, Ezra Cohen-Watnick, Derek Harvey, and Bannon all working together. They're all the ones with the Hitler Squad. And then there's this whole fabricated strife between Bannon and Trump, which got Bannon kicked out of the NSC. And then he goes on to form this War Room podcast, which, like you said, is driving the narrative. Exactly what you would need if you're combating the media that is described in the Rich Higgins memo as this pervasive entity that is all over the place 24/7, dictating the narrative battle space against Trump. You need to break through that. So then you have the Q drops come out. And then shortly after that, you have the Bannon War Room. Or did the Bannon War Room start up in, was it 2020? When they
War Room started up either late 2019 or early 2020 to cover the pandemic. Initially, it was called War Room Pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. I mean, it makes total sense that he's there and hasn't left there driving the narrative. And we know he's in contact with Trump. He just had that meeting with Trump last week. I mean, it might have been the day of the bombing, or at least the day before.
I think it was Thursday. So I think it was 2 days before, but it could be one day before. Okay. It was definitely during the week.
Yeah. Whatever it was, it almost seemed like he had advance notice that it was coming because he's did all this, just stay tuned, guys, special programming tonight. He knew.
I mean, he was already broadcasting before Trump came out with his statement, and that's on a Saturday evening. He never does that. I don't recall one other time when he has had a War Room on a Saturday afternoon or anytime on a Sunday. I mean, yes, Monday through Friday, it's on twice a day for, it's 4 hours each day.
Yeah.
I've never seen him do that on a Saturday. And he did it in advance of Trump making that announcement, which means he obviously knew. And today he's covering the debate in Congress. It's hard to call it a debate, but over the big, beautiful bill. So I wonder if there's going to be a surprise amidst all of that talk.
Yeah. I still wonder if Trump actually wants that that bill passed.
Yeah.
We should talk about that here later on. But the Steve Bannon connections, like I said, Rich Higgins, Derek Harvey, Ezra Cohen-Watnick, Steve Bannon, and then Ezra Cohen-Watnick. The day after our show last week we ended our show with the original cartoon from the Ghost in the Machine video.
Yep.
And then the next day, Ezra Cohen-Watnick comes out and he posts the Ghost in the Machine video.
Mm-hmm.
We've had multiple instances over the past couple of weeks of him just being directly on target. And then this week I think it was that we were live on Wednesday night doing our power hour when he posted this. He posted a link to the Rich Higgins memo, something that I don't think is talked about anywhere else as much as it's been here on the power hour.
I can't imagine. Aside from War Room, and 11:53 p.m. there. That's a covfefe for G Money. He would be excited about that.
Oh, there you go. Let's not get into the decodes.
So, but Ezra's come on, and Colonel Derek Harvey have come on War Room countless times over the entire course of these last 5 years. So 3 out of those 4 guys are on War Room consistently. And then, man, we haven't gone back to this clip in a really long time. But do you remember when Rich Higgins died and Steve Bannon did like a memorial show to him on War Room? Gosh, that was so interesting. I'm going to see if I can find that.
Bannon, hold on. This I think I might have I think this might be it. Rest in peace, Sergeant Rich Higgins. That might not be it. Yeah, see if you can find it. I'm going to see if I can find it too. You know what? I can pause the stream since it's recording until we do find it. Hold for processing. Okay, found it. Chris, let's pull it up here.
Guest lined up, and it's the great. So Dan Schultz, hang on for a second. Hold that answer because I know everybody's waiting for it. I want to go to Congressman Louis Gohmert. That's at the memorial service for the great patriot Rich Higgins. Louis, tell us about Rich Higgins and what he meant, not just for Trump and the Trump movement and President Trump, but what his deep meaning for the country was.
Well, he was so extraordinary, brilliant guy. I've never met anybody that was a better strategist. He could analyze the opposition, whether it was in Iraq in a combat theater or whether it was in a combat theater right here in Washington, D.C. He was great at that kind of analysis. And then coming up with the strategery to, countermand whatever was coming at the people that he cared about and the cause that he cared about. And that was especially true of this little republic, the United States. And if McMaster's, whoever ultimately fired him, because he put together a strategic plan that would have launched President Trump's presidency to an early great height instead of the floundering that was done by our Speaker of the House and others, if he had been able to not be fired by the establishment, President Trump would have been able to accomplish even more than he did. President Trump came to realize that, and actually in December of 2019, was at the White House, and I said, by the way, there was a strategic plan that was put together by Rich Higgins with some help, and it included some people that were going to give you trouble if you didn't fire them on day one. And every single person who has leaked against you, who has spoken against you, who has been a so-called whistleblower, they were all on that list.
Okay, let's stop it here for a second. So first of all, Louis Gohmert, why does he know so much about Rich Higgins?
I don't know. Louis Gohmert's always been an interesting guy. I didn't know. Sorry. I guess I never actually chased that down.
Yeah. I'm just going through his Wikipedia, like trying to figure out like why does he what is he doing here? December 27, 2020, he filed a federal lawsuit against Pence. It was an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. He was accused of His lawsuit alleged that the Electoral Count Act of 1887 was unconstitutional.
Nice.
And he was seeking to grant vice president power to reject state certified presidential electors. It was dismissed by a judge, probably for lack of standing. But he's just a congressman. Like, I don't know why he would know so much about.
And he was a judge.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's possible. I don't know that he was maybe working with him or had a relationship with Higgins earlier. By the way, there's now that you mention the election, there was an interesting clip of Emile Beauvais in his, I think it was a Senate hearing this week. He was asked about the election. Did you see that?
I did not see that. So we should do that next.
Let me pull that up. No, let's do it right now, and then we'll come back to Gomer. What do you think? Yeah?
Yeah, let's do it. That sounds good.
Okay. Here we are.
Right. Who won the 2020 election for president of the United States?
President Biden was certified as the winner of that election.
So you give the standard answer. You can't say that he won because he got the majority of votes and also got the Electoral College victory?
I think the characterizations that you just made, Senator, are both political, and so I can't address them under the canons, and they're also tied up in ongoing litigation.
Help me understand how it's political to state who got the most votes in any election.
Senator, I'm just trying to be precise. The process by which our country declares the victor in an election is a certification process. President Biden was certified.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Welch.
Yield back. Thank you.
That's
Senator
interesting. What did he say about ongoing litigation there?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So that's the part that that matters. And so that's what I thought of when we saw that Gohmert, or when you mentioned that Gohmert had pursued the election. Some of that stuff's still going on. And Gohmert's exactly right that the Electoral Count Act is unconstitutional. And, the way we hold our elections is unconstitutional, not to mention illegitimate and not to mention fraudulent. But yeah,
100%.
That's very interesting.
I want to play that clip one more time just to get his answer again, because this is one of Trump's attorneys, former attorneys. I'm pretty sure he was on Trump's legal team.
And he and Todd Blanche were essentially running the Justice Department before Pam Bondi was sworn in. And I even read an article, I think it was in the New York Times or something, where it talked about how Bondi was kind of pushed off to the side from where an attorney general would normally be because Blanche and Beauvais were doing so many things. And I'm not sure if that's still the case at all, but they basically had a system operating before she arrived.
Yeah, 100%. I remember that story, but now he's going to be like a judge, I think.
Beauvais is?
Yeah, didn't he get nominated? Isn't that what that interview's for?
Yeah, let me look that up.
No, he is a nominee to serve as a circuit judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit.
Oh, wow.
And that's where that's why he's going through the confirmation stuff. But I'm going to play this one part here again. I just want to hear that answer to the ongoing litigation.
And also got the Electoral College victory?
I think the characterizations that you just made, Senator, are both political, and so I can't address them under the canons, and they're also tied up in ongoing litigation.
Help me understand.
That's crazy. I love that so much. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, well, let's come back to Gomer here. So he's talking about Rich Higgins and developing the strategy behind. I don't remember his exact characterization of it, but it had to do with strategy documents and special ops guy, regular warfare guy, but then also the hit list squad. He's talking about the NSC. That's the part that's huge to me because that's when he was working with Bannon, Ezra, Harvey, all those guys. And that's when the memo was born. And I still say that the memo is almost required monthly reading because it's becoming more and more relevant with how accurate it is. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to this, otherwise you can keep playing it.
Yeah, let's just keep going.
Okay. And that he said, we need to have that meeting. I need to see what Rich had written. So it was about 2 weeks later, as President Trump requested, we were at Mar-a-Lago, and I had Rich and Derek Harvey there, and President Trump turned to Rich and he said, I understand you've been trying to get me information for a few years now, and I am not going to leave here until you tell me everything you want me to know. And that was quite, President Trump. And he.
When was that meeting?
We can rewind back to it. I don't remember. I didn't catch a date.
Yeah, I need to. So that's hugely important, I think.
Yeah, let's go back.
So it was about 2 weeks later, as President Trump requested. They were all on that list.
Yeah.
If you could, people that were going to give you trouble if you didn't fire them on day one, and every single person who has leaked against you, who has spoken against you, who has been a so-called whistleblower, they were all on that list. If you could have gotten that, he said, we need to have that meeting. I need to see what Rich had written. So it was about 2 weeks later, as President Trump requested. We were at Mar-a-Lago, and I had Rich and Derek Harvey there. And President Trump turned to Rich and he said, I understand you've been trying to get me information for a few years now, and I am not going to leave here until you tell me everything you want me to know. And that was quite, President Trump, and he's good at quick studies, but there were so many people, as you recall, around him, especially in the early days, who were not friends, who were not there to help. And it was nearly 3 hours later, President Trump had the information and he began to act on it. And, there were forces in the establishment here in Washington. If Rich's strategic plan could have been put in place, if Trump had gotten it in a timely manner, things would be a lot different today. We wouldn't have wasted all that time talking about the Russia hoax. Those people would have been out of work that were stirring up those lies. But Rich, I had a constituent who was with the State Department and heard from his father that, he was in Sinai there in Yemen capital when the Houthi rebels took over. And he was a few miles with 3 other State Department employees, and they were either going to be killed or certainly captured. They didn't have a way to get back to the embassy. So who gets called? Rich. And Rich calls a friend named Flynn. You may have heard of him. And they talked to some other people. They put together an effort to use social media in Yemen, find out exactly where the Yemeni rebels, the Houthi rebels were, and they were able to talk him through and around where the rebels were, get them back to the embassy compound and save 4 lives, all from a call to Rich Higgins. This is
using social media.
Yeah. I mean, the social media stuff in the Middle East, that was like the programs that they ran on social media in 2020, Stanley McChrystal, Defeat Disinfo, and et cetera. All of that stuff was set up and tested in the Middle East with the Arab Spring and some of these other events. So I wonder if that's the sort of thing he's talking about.
That is fascinating. Fascinating. We'll listen to this clip and then we'll comment more. But we never really found out the time frame of that meeting. But
yeah, we would have had to go back further, I think, maybe.
Yeah, I can do that after the show.
This is an asset that will not easily ever be replaced, but we can thank God that he was here to help America.
We got to bounce, Louis. We're coming to a hard break at the end of the show, but God bless everybody out there. Send our regards. The War Room honors Rich Higgins. We're going to make sure we're getting back of the support for the family. So, Congressman Louis Gohmert, you were there from the beginning. You saw what he was up against.
Brother. Yes, thank you so much. Well, you were up against the same thing. Thanks, Stephen.
Man.
Yeah. Louis Gohmert just became so much more interesting.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a much deeper dig on that. But yeah, the fact that that memo is coming back in, it's Ezra kind of posting it, and then what Bannon's saying. I mean, it's also interesting, the narrative stuff that we're seeing play out right now with the Iran conflict. That's where we started with this whole thing.
Yeah,
it just becomes that much more interesting. All of it does. What we saw this week with the two sides telling each other ahead of time about their bombing, which completely defeats the purpose of the bombings themselves, which means the whole bombing was just to like appease the warmongers, essentially, like just to say they did it, if they even did it at all. The whole thing was a narrative conflict. That's all it was. And
it's for 100% on board. 100% on board with that. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily for the normie. Well, I mean, I guess you could kind of make cases both ways. It's definitely to rid people of the fear of the nuclear existential threat. And I think that Donald Trump, part of the mission is to remove these existential threat narratives. It's not about the existential threat itself. It's not about climate change. It's not about pandemics. It's not about AI taking over. It's not about, any of the other possibilities, the nuclear threat, etc. It's about what the narrative enables the enemy to do, because people buy into the threats, and they buy into the threats because they're fascinating and they're mysterious. They give us the illusion that humanity can destroy itself and the world. And this is just part of the thinking that usurps God and the position that God holds in our society. And when you've done that, well, then you can just allow any sort of threat, any sort of worldly threat to overtake your life. And the enemy knows that, which is why they keep creating these existential threats. And so I think that Trump is doing a pretty good job of getting rid of all of these. And, we keep hearing about NOAA and some of the weather related stuff that's going on. And, and I know that people get uncomfortable about some of this stuff, thinking that these fires are man-made and started and directed intentionally. I'm pretty sure with the fires, that's the case. Then you got earthquakes and hurricanes, and people can't really wrap their head around that.
Tornadoes.
But yeah, these are physical aspects of our world. And we know that physical aspects of our world can be affected by man. And so if it's possible to cause these sorts of things, and the cause is then removed, then you have taken away another one of these existential threats. Because you look at the way that natural disasters are capitalized on, and they are all capitalized on. You call a state of emergency, you get a ton of federal funding, and then you have these massive construction projects where everybody makes a lot of money and people get real estate at ultra low values and turn it into something magnificent that's worth a lot of money. All that's coming from the displacement of actual people who were property owners because of the natural disasters. And we just saw that sort of thing play out in Tennessee and North Carolina, 6 months ago.
Yeah, we just actually last night had a bunch of tornadoes in Bismarck, North Dakota. Like there's a picture of, like just north of like 7 miles north of where I live. But it ended up going east of town.
Do you guys have a history of that?
I will say this: we have tornadoes in the area occasionally, but I've never seen one this close to Bismarck in my entire life living there, and I've never seen it like this big or bad.
Yeah,
like I've never.
That's crazy.
And we've had like 2 or 3 weeks in a row now, I guess, of tornadoes. Luckily, I've been gone for 2 of those 3 weeks, but
world,
it's crazy. But going back to what you said and what I said about the normies, like the reason they're doing this is for the normies. This goes back to what I said last week, when it's not for the benefit of the normies. It's because the normies are too stupid to actually wake up and understand what's going on, that these things have to be done to like check the boxes, as you said, take the narrative threats away from what the normies are afraid of. And what you said there about God and like how, finding God and how important that is. And once really, that's the only thing that we should be trying to do. When you look at what previous administrations were doing, they were doing everything they can to push us away from God. Like everything. Everything was so divisive. It was pushing us further and further away from God. And then Trump comes in and he's like, he's the first openly pro-God president that I can remember, other than, every now and then you get a president who'd be like, oh yeah, thank God, God bless the United States. But were any of them actually pro-God in any way? No.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to me to be the case. Yeah, I mean, as far as the normies being too stupid, I mean, maybe, but there's a lot of the, even in the truth community, a lot of people who aren't willing to engage with many of these ideas. You know, the nuclear threat for them is still just as big. There were people 2 weeks ago wanting Iran to be wiped off the map because they had nuclear weapons or could get nuclear weapons someday. I mean, there's the entire side of the argument. And that's not just, well, it is mainly it's normies about nukes and normies about this stuff. But there are some people who spend all of their time on these issues who are still deathly afraid of these existential threats.
Yeah. I would consider them normies and consider them stupid. Yeah. And maybe not stupid, but that's the reason things have to play out the way they do. And why I feel like we're way behind on the timeline, whatever the timeline is, but that's my opinion, not having any inside access info.
Yeah.
And obviously being wrong about whatever the timeline is, as I have been wrong about the timeline over and over again. But yeah,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Thinking about the timelines though, you know, a lot of the stuff that's happening right now in terms of Middle Eastern peace, Chinese trade deal, the TikTok thing, there's a lot of these things that, and we've talked about this a number of times, but that seemed like they were ready to happen in 2020. And then just for whatever reason didn't happen. All the courts shut down the TikTok thing or whatever. You know, you can go through the Chinese trade. Yes, the very deadly pandemic came along. And so all of those things from 2020 were pushed aside. Here they are coming back in 2025. And you have to wonder if the people had been ready to understand all this stuff back then, could it have simply happened then? If people are ready to understand it now, could it all happen now? Or do we need to see all this stuff get pushed back again and again, 90 days or 6 months or 2 years or whatever, because people aren't ready to take that next step, no matter what's told to them? I mean,
you know,
and one last thing, you know, one of the centerpieces of our discussion last week was the fact that the Top Gun scenario was laid out for a week and then executed. And did you see Raising Cane reference Top Gun this week?
I didn't see him reference that. I did see him show us how bunker buster bombs work. Like, this is how they work, and this is how they would have worked in the situation we used them, but we're not going to show you any of the damage they caused in the situation we're telling you we use them in. Like, I thought that was funny, because that's exactly what we did last week.
Check this out. This is I'm only going to play like 15 seconds.
National Guard. The crews ranked from captain to colonel, and most were graduates of the Air Force Weapons School headquartered at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. I will state for the record that there is no beach volleyball or football at the Air Force Weapons School.
I mean, beach volleyball is the first Top Gun and beach football is the second Top Gun.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I did not see that, or didn't catch it if I did see it. But I was going to say something about, okay, you were talking about Trump removing these narrative threats, and we're talking about the normies and Trump walking away, and, you know, all these things were ready to go, but then for whatever reason, they like stopped doing them. We had this interim period with Biden in there, the devolution term. Now Trump's back, and it's like some of the stuff is, but you know, it's ready to be reinitiated, but it keeps getting delayed. Do you think that there is some actual threat out there that exists? Because I do. I don't know necessarily what it is. I think there's a real enemy that can cause real damage in some way. I don't know what the damage is. But if there isn't, then that's where I have the problem with what we're seeing. Because if there's no actual damage that can be taking place, just tell us. Does normies be damned? Everybody be damned. Stories be damned. All that stuff. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that some of the damage that could take place is just the disintegration of stabilized society. You know, if the money changes over immediately and people are just like, how do I operate within this new system? Even assuming that they were given like an on-ramp somehow, that would be really difficult. You know, if there was a disruption in the information flow, the finance, the electricity and resources, like there's a number of ways that things could be disrupted that would be destabilizing for society. Even, and I was talking about this on my show a little bit yesterday, and I know we're going to get into Supreme Court decisions, but the one specifically about the LGBTQ books in the schools, part of the concern on the side of the statists and the indoctrination centers and the progressive globalist agenda, part of the concern that they have is a legitimate one, to the extent that if parents are able to opt their kids out of various types of learning in a school, yes, fine on the religious level, but what if it goes deeper than that? What if it's evolution in addition to the LGBTQ stuff? What if it's race education? What if it's different stories from history that have clearly been falsified in the way we are taught them, and parents want to opt their kids out of all of that stuff? Then you have to actually pare the curriculum down to the roots, like reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? So even if that's the right answer, to do it all immediately means that schooling changes completely. And so there's a disruption, and I don't know if that itself would destabilize society in any important way. But in terms of all of the teachers out there and the teachers' unions and the people who work at schools and the people who work in the education field, you know, you might be talking hundreds of thousands to millions of people. And that one change would potentially upset the balance for all of that stuff. Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm just saying that if you applied that in 10 ways or 15 ways or 50 ways, whatever it might be, to just really reverse things right now, it could be like just widespread destabilization.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. It's just, I think we run the risk of the enemy getting a footing if we don't do things quick enough. You know, I totally agree. If change is too gradual, we risk the change not ever happening versus ripping the Band-Aid off, you know?
Yeah. The other way I think of this, though, is like a sliding scale with, you know, the good twin on one end, the evil twin on the other end. And it's this push and pull the entire time, right? Especially when one side had all the power and the other side is now taking all that power away and seems to have a dominating sort of power. Well, what does the evil twin faction do at that point? Well, they're negotiating backwards, right? They're trying to make their retreat as slow as possible. They're trying to lose as little of the system as possible and as little of the control as possible. And so then it's leverage versus their negotiating points, whatever those might be. And so to the extent that they still control various systems or institutions or functions or people's minds or whatever, it's got to be brought down in some sort of stepwise process, unless the enemy is meant to actually be crushed quickly, which in my mind gives them a better chance of coming back than if they are slowly destroyed piece by piece. And I think that we can see them losing their negotiations gradually. Like at this point, we are up into the high levels of the enemy with the neocon, the globalist establishment worldwide. If that's the thing that's now being chipped away at, and I think that that's what's happening, we're toward the end of that process where now that ultimate kind of centralized power behind the other layers of power, now that thing is being diminished and they are fighting for survival. And so I think that it's just this ongoing negotiation.
I really like that example because I think it fits what a good segue for this next topic. The discussion this week was whether or not the bombing actually took place. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's this classified briefing that was given to members of Congress, okay? And somebody from the Congress leaked it to the media to push a narrative that there's low confidence that the bombing took place, whatever the damage was done. And that's one of those things that they've used for a long time to control the narrative and dictate the narrative, is leaking stuff, whether it's in whole or in part or whatever, doesn't matter. That is now being attacked and taken away because they're going to investigate that. And I got a great clip here. It's kind of long. I won't play the whole thing, but I think we should watch this a little bit because they're not holding back. They're going to go after this. And it just makes me think of Adam Schiff and the Russia collusion hoax and all the times he was leaking stuff to media, and Comey and who knows who else in government leaks stuff to the press, and their complicity in a lot of the damage that's been done in this country.
Mm-hmm. Todd, the Pentagon's working with the FBI to investigate this leak. Is the DOJ prepared to charge whoever?
This is Todd Blanche, right? The guy who was working with Emil Bove, who we played earlier.
Yep. And I think that he was an attorney in one of the Trump impeachments as well.
Yep.
Whoever is responsible, and what could those charges look like?
I mean, absolutely. Of course we're ready. I mean, just think for a moment. During the last administration, the Attorney General issued a memorandum that didn't allow the Department of Justice to investigate leakers without some insane level of a high level of finding that you would have to do first. We reversed that. The Attorney General Bondi reversed that over a month ago. And it's precisely for this kind of conduct where you have some deep state intelligence personnel, not based on the facts, not based on the truth, but based on something that they want an agenda that they have to thwart President Trump. They issue something like this and then leak it to CNN and the New York Times, where the New York Times article has 5 reporters on the case, and that's to mask how they got that information. So we are now going to investigate that completely and fully. And so you better believe, and the American people better know for sure, that this is exactly the type of conduct that we will investigate fully.
Steve Witkoff last night on The Angle said, from his perspective, he's a pretty smart guy, this is treasonous. Your reaction to that?
Listen, I couldn't agree more with what he said as far as the damage that this could do. I mean, it's terrible.
I'll stop it there, but I think it's right. It's treason, and I think they're going to go after this. And be the first time I could think of ever that they're actually going to go after a leaker of information like this, and hopefully it's just a start.
He said something else really interesting there that caught my ear, talking about masking these leakers with a number of names in the byline on the article. You put 5 people there. Well, now you have to figure out all 5 people's sources and who could have talked to them. And with one person writing an article, it's probably much easier to understand who that person is in communication with. So that is very crafty, especially now we see, 5, 6, 7, 8 names in a byline on a CNN article. And a lot of that is just because they're repurposing prior printed material so that they can give the backstory and the official story repeatedly in every article, which is the most annoying thing. But then the only other thing I would say is, there's a possibility as well that this thing was leaked intentionally so that the media would take up the wrong side of this issue and give the perfect public enemy to slam all week. And they did do that. They slammed the media all week for not going along with the story about the bombing and how everything was obliterated. And it seems like the Trump side has won that narrative battle, which is, again, a positive thing if they're winning narrative battles that easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okay, hold on one second.
So before we move on, I just want to mention one more thing on the Israel-Iran thing. With this MacGuffin that Bannon's talking about, that's basically this storytelling device that is unrelated to the advancement of the plot. Like it's brought in from outside to advance the plot, to give the plot a goal. And Bannon talking about the nuclear threat that way, I think is really incredible. And I hope that we continue down that road.
Well, okay, so now we're going to move on from this, but now I'm curious. Is he saying you think that the nuclear threat itself is the MacGuffin? Like, is he calling it fake here?
That's what I think, yeah. I mean, and to be clear, it's the nuclear threat is one thing. Nuclear weapons are another thing, right? So there could be nuclear weapons in the world, and the nuclear threat in Iran could still be totally fake and made up specifically for this narrative operation, right? So you don't even, and I'm not attributing to Bannon that he is denying nukes there, though he might be. I thought his comments were pretty expansive about the nuclear threat and throughout time, and not just specifically on this case, but I could be wrong about that. So either way, the weapons are separate from the threat. The weapons could exist. The threat can still be fake. And so I think that at minimum, he was calling the nuclear threat from Iran fake.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how the next couple of weeks go with this situation, because all the neocons, the warmongers, the evil twin in Israel, they still want to go further. They want to keep bombing. Like that narrative that we didn't get all the nukes and everything is still out there, and there are people pushing that, and they want us to continue this forever conflict. But Trump has pretty much put an end to it. I almost think that his post that he had, like the very laying it on thick for Bibi Netanyahu, I feel like that was something he agreed to. He was like, okay, Bibi, I'm going to ask your people not to go after you anymore, but you just have to play along and say that we got the nukes. Okay. Like just play along, end the war, whatever. That's my thoughts. I have no idea if that's accurate because he laid that on so thick. It was too thick.
Yeah, I talked about this on my show at some length yesterday. I think that Bibi is aligned with Trump on all this stuff. And I think that Bibi is fighting against the neocon faction and the neoliberal faction in Israel, just as Trump is here. I think the witch hunt is the same thing. They were trying in Israel to manipulate the court system so that the court becomes the ultimate supreme authority, as it was in Brazil. And we saw that modeled with Alexander de Moraes. They've got a color revolution going against Benjamin Netanyahu. They've got the witch hunt. Trump even called it a witch hunt. Same thing that happened to him. So, you know, the patterns there, I side with that stuff. I know Ghost sides with the history on Netanyahu, and he might be right, and that's all good. But that's like, as far as the pattern matching goes, I'm not going to leave that position. And so if Trump and Bibi are aligned on this, and they're going after the neocon faction in Israel, and I think that right now is being represented by Israel Katz, the defense minister, who keeps pushing these stories forward. And I don't know if I'm right about that designation, but that dynamic there, I think, is the big deal. And we can see the neocon faction in the United States on Fox News supporting those ideas.
Yeah, sure. No, you have a point. You both make good points. It's I'm like in the middle. I don't know one way or the other. And I almost try to play Switzerland when it comes to this, because I don't know, and I haven't taken the time to do the research to figure out one way or the other. But ultimately, I think we're going to have a pretty good idea depending on how things play out. Like if things play out and Netanyahu's still in there and they drop the charges and all these things, you may be right, or maybe we'll never find out. I don't know. But before we get into the SCOTUS rulings, I do just want to talk about the big beautiful bill briefly, because there's this major push. Congress has been totally irrelevant to this point, at least in terms of getting anything from Trump's agenda done. They're fraudulent anyway. But with the bill specifically, we've been talking so many times over the years about one of these times we're not going to get one of these things passed, and we're going to reach the debt ceiling, and that's what's going to be like the turning point that gets us to the next system, or at least the launching pad to start that process. And yesterday, we were in the car driving, and I was replaying an old clip of mine, because we were talking. It was the Fed Powell, the Fed chair. There's a story from CNN that came out, and let me mention this quick too. So the mainstream media, CNN, they're finally catching up to what we've been talking about since April, about Trump potentially naming a shadow Fed chair, which was Bessent's idea from before Trump won the election, before we even knew Bessent was going to be Treasury Secretary. So I just thought this was interesting. But anyway, I was replaying this old clip, and I said something in there that made me think about it in terms of the big beautiful bill. So I always go back to what Trump said when he was talking about building the wall. If I would have just said I didn't want the wall, they would have built it for me, right? Talking about the Democrats and everybody else in Congress. Because sometimes he's acknowledging there that he knows if he says one thing, all of his enemies will take the opposite approach to whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when you apply that filter to lots of things going on, but especially the big beautiful bill, what if he actually doesn't want the big beautiful bill, but he's advocating so hard for it to get the people to not pass it because he doesn't want it anyway? He wants a shutdown. Like, that's what I think we're potentially witnessing right now with the big beautiful bill.
Yeah, man, I think that that's exactly right. And I think it's really funny because it's BBB, Build Back Better. So you can imagine in a different scenario where Trump wasn't here, they would be trying to pass a package that would be working toward building back better. And it would probably be something that would absolutely destroy the budget, the deficit, the debt, all of that, and maybe crash the currency, which again is kind of what they were intending to do with the Great Reset. So all of that falls in line down two story directions. And I think when that happens, you can really see that the difference between the two sides of what's going on here. I'm 100% in agreement with you that they don't have the authority to pass legislation of any kind that directs the American people's behavior, requires them to submit taxes or any of that. But also, I'm not entirely certain that Trump wants that to happen, because sooner or later, down either path is some sort of financial disruption and reset.
Yeah. And it's crazy to me too, like all the things Trump campaigned on and that we were looking forward to, the big beautiful bill kind of flies in the face of a lot of it. Like it's antithetical to a lot of it, and it just doesn't make sense. There's no way that we can't accomplish all the things that he said he's going to accomplish with in terms of finances and the economy in this country without passing an 1,000-page bill with all these other nooks and crannies of who knows what else is in there. Just doesn't make sense.
Analyzing it through AI is going to be helpful. You said something really interesting there, though, talking about Trump under his understanding that whatever he does, the enemy is going to try to thwart him no matter what he does. That's an incredible advantage when you are game planning something, knowing that the enemy is going to react, even if it's a set of possibilities. They're going to do this, or this. You know that they're going to try to thwart your attempt in one way or another. And so you can then kind of direct them into doing certain things under the belief that they're going to be thwarting you. But at that point, if you're playing it well, they're going to be doing the thing that you want them to be doing. And I think that we could probably sit here for 3 hours and think of examples of that.
Oh yeah. It's reverse psychology, but it's like narrative reverse psychology. You're like dictating the narrative by using reverse psychology publicly. It's an interesting concept, one we should definitely discuss more. And that's when it comes to Powell too, it can be applied both ways. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not Powell's a good guy, as long as he's doing what Trump wants him to do. And by Trump going after him so hard, like, hey, lower the rates, and Powell, whether or not he's a good guy, he's not doing what Trump wants him to do. But it's exactly what Trump actually wants him to do. He's not doing what Trump is publicly asking him to do, but it's exactly what Trump privately wants him to do. Look at the rate of the dollar's like the lowest it's ever been right now. I'm pretty sure, like in the last like 3 or 4 years or something, it's the lowest it's been, which is good for the tariff stuff. I'm not an economist, so I'm probably botching my explanation of this. But then you go back to, what's that guy's name who wrote that report?
You're talking about the Mar-a-Lago Accord, right?
Yes. If you look at the Mar-a-Lago Accord, he's like, there's this very narrow path that we can go to, and it's one of the goals there is to get the dollar a lot lower, which is what we're seeing now. And part of it is because I think Powell isn't doing what Trump needs him to do with the rates. I don't know. Just throwing it out there.
Stephen Moran is the guy's name. And also on that CNN article with the headline, if you want to pull it back up, they're saying that this is unprecedented in American history. The Fed has only existed for 112 years. So the fact that Trump is doing something unprecedented in the Fed's history, they're trying to kind of give the audience the impression that that the Fed is actually kind of part of America at its founding. And they always try to play that game to make all of their institutions seem like they are A, constitutional, and B, what the founders would have intended.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. What do you think of Bessent being the chair, Fed chair?
I mean, I like Scott Bessent. He's very well spoken. He makes the case incredibly well. I think he's got good people around him. So, I mean, sounds good to me. But then again, I don't know do we need a Federal Reserve? Do we need an IRS? Or do we just need the U.S. Treasury?
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Here's another. We're going to transition into the Supreme Court stuff, right?
Yep.
So one of those decisions yesterday, and I'll go through this really quick, but I haven't heard anybody else talk about this. One of those decisions yesterday, the one on the FCC and how they have this tax that is added on to everybody's like phone bill, for instance, so that you can pay for services that go out to rural areas and underserved areas and blah, blah, blah. So I expected that the Supreme Court would say that agencies don't have the constitutional ability to levy a tax. And then I thought, well, if they take that ability away from the FCC, would that then also apply to the IRS? Because the IRS isn't like a constitutionally mandated body. You know, I believe that the 16th Amendment should be nullified immediately. But even beyond that, if an agency can't make tax rules, and maybe the argument is that the IRS is only executing what Congress has designated them to do. I'm not well studied on the IRS and how it functions, but I just thought there was some interesting potential connection there.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen here. I have a political article talking about the FCC one in particular. Because I saw this. I talked about it briefly on my show, but I didn't dig into it. And so I just want to read this quick. Supreme Court on Friday upheld the constitutionality of a multi-billion-dollar fund used to expand telephone and broadband services The 6-3 ruling is a victory for the FCC, which operates the pot of money in question known as the Universal Service Fund. It's also a rare win at the Supreme Court for agency power, as the court's conservative majority, which is often skeptical of independent agencies, passed up an opportunity to further weaken the administrative state. 3 liberal justices and 3 conservatives formed the court's majority. That is very interesting. The money in the Universal Fund comes from charges collected from telephone providers through a surcharge on customers' bills. It is used for a mix of internet connectivity, subsidy programs that help schools, libraries, low-income households. In upholding the fund, the justices rejected the bid by some legal conservatives to weaken the administrative state by reviving a controversial theory known as the non-delegation doctrine. Under that doctrine, Congress has extremely limited authority to delegate policymaking decisions to executive branch agencies. Didn't we just go through that with what's it called? What was the big decision that got removed?
The Chevron doctrine?
Chevron.
Like a year ago? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
there have
what
been
the
a
hell?
there have been a number of decisions that go in that direction, which is why I was shocked at this one. And so I think you got Thomas Alito and Gorsuch as the dissenters. And I don't, who knows what all that's about. The idea that that an agency can just decide on a tax and then collect that tax, that shouldn't be the case. So I don't know. To be fair, we also haven't read the decision, so there might be something more in there, and the argument might be more compelling than we are giving it credit for.
Yeah, I'm just gonna read these last 2 paragraphs because I think that's the problem. I'm gonna have to actually read through this. But the dissenters, like you said, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch. Gorsuch said the court effectively rewrote the law in order to deem it constitutional. We wind up in much the same place, only now with judges rather than presidents or bureaucrats making our laws, which they kind of, in the other ruling, the universal injunction ruling, ruled the opposite way. So that's notable. But proponents of the non-delegation doctrine argued that Congress handed way too much power when instructed the FCC to determine how much money to collect for Universal Service Fund. Man, the fund represents a tax. That's what it seems like. But then, man, it's crazy. I'm gonna have to read through this thing.
You know what? Can we read Kagan's little piece down there? So she writes, consumers research contends that the act gives the FCC boundless authority, but the provisions it points to show nothing of the kind. The test consumers research proposes would also throw a host of federal statutes into doubt, as Congress has often empowered agencies to raise revenue without specifying a numeric cap or tax rate. And so, again, it's a practical concern. And we see that all the time with Kagan and Sotomayor and Jackson, and occasionally with some of the others. They are worried about what the result of their decision is going to be. And therefore, they make a decision that is itself totally anti-constitutional. And their only role is to determine whether or not XYZ is constitutional.
And I still think at some point, too, we need to get to a point where the judiciary branch is deemed irrelevant. And what's going to put the actual judiciary branch back into their constitutional box? Because we're seeing a little bit where SCOTUS did this ruling with the universal injunctions, and maybe we can just segue right into it. This was the SCOTUS putting the judiciary as a whole, the circuit judges or whatever, back into a little bit of their constitutional box. But I still think SCOTUS and the majority of the judiciary branch they've been operating outside of that for far too long anyway. Like this ruling right here is a great example of it. Like what you just said, they need to be put back into their box too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what does that. Like at some point, either Trump needs to start operating outside of their control, which I think he can at any point, but he's chosen not to, or something. But let's talk about the ruling, because this is one of the most probably newsworthy ones. And you know what? Stephen Miller probably has the best explanation of the whole thing. Let me pull up this clip, which I got right here. He goes on with Newsmax, and this is what he said.
Stephen, it's good to see you today. You got a smile on your face. I know it was a really big ruling by the
Can you hear this, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Supreme Court. I know what it means to you guys, how hard you guys have been fighting all of this, judicial lawfare. What is the weight of today's ruling, and how effectively will this slow down, these ridiculous injunctions and that kind of lawfare?
Yes, well, today was an incredibly important day for democracy with this 6-3 ruling, striking down the practice of district court nationwide injunctions. Let me break this down a little bit so that your audience can understand just how important this is. There's about 677 district court judges in the United States of America. It takes only a small handful of those 677 to cause unimaginable havoc all throughout the country and the federal government. Because any one of these judges, say a single judge in San Francisco, or a single judge in Boston, or a single judge in Manhattan, can, before today's Supreme Court ruling, issue an edict that is binding on the entire nation. Nobody living in Texas, for example, consented to be ruled by a judge in San Francisco. Nobody living in Oklahoma consented to be ruled by a judge living in Chicago. But under the system, any judge, any communist judge, any Marxist judge, any crazy left-wing judge could decide major national questions for the whole country. So, for example, they could decide that the Pentagon must allow transgender troops and service members into every single part of the U.S. military, and the president and the secretary of defense are powerless to do anything about it. Or a single district court judge could decide, for example, that an entire class of illegal aliens is exempt from deportation in all 50 states in the entire country. Or a single judge could rule, for example, that a major federal agency would be forced to pursue illegal race-based discrimination, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So policy after policy after policy was being decided not by the elected president, the one official elected by the whole American people, but by unelected judges. And in many cases, we're talking about unelected tyrants who are imposing their will on the entire nation. So this is really a momentous ruling. It is a ruling that we have hoped for, not just, by the way, over the last 5 months, but over the entirety of the last number of years, going back to 2017, when this judicial lawfare, really judicial, again, tyranny, began of district court judges trying to sabotage the entire executive branch, and with it, the entire democracy of our country.
You know, it's what that made me think of is back when they were talking about back in 2020, 2021 with the election cases, how like one state and their elections can have the effect of stealing an election and it affecting all the other states, but those states somehow have no standing. But this ruling here, one judge from a state can make a ruling, they deem that unconstitutional now. But how is that any different? You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, I think that's an apt comparison. And the amount of power that they have, considering the lawfare apparatus, I mean, the uniparty, the global regime, can shop for which district and which judge they're most likely to get their desired decision from. And then, you know, a president who's obviously governing with an overwhelming mandate from the people is completely thwarted instantly, because you can get one out of these 677 judges to say that's unconstitutional. That's not even what they're supposed to be judging, which was some of the basis of Justice Barrett's opinion yesterday.
Yeah, there's one great part of this ruling that I gotta get to it here. I thought this was hilarious. So in the opinion, they had a little footnote, and on the footnote, they basically call out one of the dissenters. I think it was Kagan. The principal dissent faults us for failing to identify a single founding era case in which this court held that universal injunctions exceed a federal court's equitable authority. That this court had no occasion to reject the universal injunction as inconsistent with traditional equity practice merely demonstrates that no party even bothered to ask for such a sweeping remedy, because no court would have entertained that request. Basically saying, yeah, there is no history of this because it's totally unconstitutional. Like nobody ever would have granted this before until now, until these judges. It's all politics. They're basically calling out for politics. And it was Sotomayor, not Kagan. Yeah, I thought that was hilarious. They like smacked her down.
Yeah, Barrett had a pretty good one on Ketanji Brown Jackson yesterday as well. And, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson was put into the Supreme Court by the auto pen and a bunch of illegitimate senators. So I don't believe she'll actually have a Supreme Court career. But yeah, that you pulled it up.
Yeah, I think this is it.
That's it. Yeah.
Is this one you're talking about? Okay. Yeah, I'll read this too. But you're right. I was looking back actually, but before we started recording, because the auto pen, it's such an interesting thing, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of it. The reported first use of the auto pen is June of 2022. I think Kagan was put in there February. Yeah.
Okay.
Or, sorry, Jackson was put in there. Ketanji Jackson was put in there February of 2022. Okay. So, I mean, it's obvious she's illegitimate anyway, but I think if they're gonna continue to operate in the normie battle space, they're gonna need a normie reason, such as the auto pen, to delegitimize her instead of just the fact that Biden was never legitimately the president in the first place. But we'll see if the auto pen goes back that far and has that effect. We'll see. Anyway, should I read this whole thing?
Nah, I mean, I think everybody's probably seen this. So
I actually haven't yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay,
No.
cool. Let's go through it then.
Okay. We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We observe only this: Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary. Wow.
And the arguments at the Supreme Court, I don't know, it was a month or 6 weeks ago, were very much in line with that. It seemed like the justices were very careful to protect the power of the judiciary in their arguments. And it didn't, obviously that didn't win the day for them, but yeah, I mean, this is a stripping away of the power of the judiciary and a power of all the institutions that support the judiciary.
I love, this is Barrett that wrote this?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a little surprising too. Let me keep going here. No one disputes that the executive has a duty to follow the law. The judiciary does not have unbridled authority to enforce this obligation. In fact, sometimes the law prohibits the judiciary from doing so. Down. If courts do not have authority to require, I think this is Jackson in what she said. If courts do not have the authority to require the executive to adhere to the law universally, compliance with law sometimes becomes a matter of executive prerogative. Observing the limits on judicial authority, including, as relevant here, the boundaries of the Judiciary Act of 1789, is required by a judge's oath to follow the law. Justice Jackson skips over that part because analyzing the governing statute involves boring legalese. She seeks to answer a far more basic question of enormous practical significance. May a federal court in the United States of America order the executive to follow the law? In other words, it is unnecessary to consider whether Congress has constrained the judiciary. What matters is how the judiciary may constrain the executive. Justice Jackson would do well to heed her own admonition. Admonition? Am I saying that right?
Admonition, yeah.
Yeah. Everyone from the president on down is bound by the law. That goes for judges too. That is a smackdown.
Yeah.
Wow. Crazy, man.
Yeah, not the critical part of the issue, of course, but it's good that someone's pointing that out, and that she's taking the other side from the judicial supremacy. I think this case is going to have profound implications. And I guess on Thursday, the court is expected to release some sort of guidance about how the cases that are already in play that this will affect, what should be done about those cases. Because you think about what is it, something like 110 of these have been filed against Trump, and however many have been granted.
Yeah, and I think there's 19 in front of SCOTUS or something like that.
No kidding.
Yeah, that they were supposed to be addressing, but it's ridiculous, and it's been the theme of the first 4 months of Trump's administration is the judiciary branch and the Democrats. They file this injunction, the judge grants it, and it impedes Trump's administration. Trump's being impeded by both the other two branches of government. And so how is he expected to get anything done? He's not going to, but this is a good step in the right direction.
Yeah. ChatGPT says it's about 30 or 40 nationwide injunctions. And this says most have been curtailed following or stayed following the ruling. I haven't seen anything on that, so I would want to vet that claim. But so that's a great many issues that need to be reconsidered on the basis of this ruling, and all of those those nationwide injunctions are going to be wiped away, I think.
Yeah. But then again, I want to go back. I want to see how this affects, like, how can a judge rule that somebody doesn't have standing when, like, because that's a nationwide effect when it comes to elections. How can a judge rule there's no standing for a challenger bringing an election thing against a state? Like the one that we saw was Texas or Pennsylvania. I don't remember. There's like 19 states that were ruled to not have standing.
Yeah. That was a SCOTUS ruling though.
That's true.
So, so I get your point, like in the principle that what can be done in this one location shouldn't be for the whole country, but I think that that's one of those situations where it kind of has to be because it's already at the federal government level, and standing is different than a nationwide injunction.
For sure. I'm just saying, like, the principle of it, the underlying principle seems, I don't know, because one judge making that ruling, not allowing that case to move forward, that has a pretty profound effect on the rest of the country.
I wonder what's going to happen in those cases. Do you remember when there was a controversy when they were letting that case go, and there was a Texas legislator who in the Texas legislature said he retold a story he had heard about what was going on at the Supreme Court and how they declined to take that case because they were worried that there would be riots and mayhem to follow if they did. Do you remember that?
Vaguely, yeah.
I'll have to try
the whole thing's ridiculous. We can maybe address that next week. We should do a little digging on that because there's got to be a solution there at some point. You would think. I do have to get rolling here. We got to get going over to Lakeland for that meetup. So we're cutting this episode short. I do deeply apologize.
We got all our ads in.
We did. We don't have a studio ad night. I might see if I can get one squeezed in later. I wonder if we can figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I would say is for everybody who's watching or listening on Rumble to go ahead and hit the thumbs up.
Yeah, hit that thumbs up. We appreciate it. If you gave any rants, we appreciate those as well. I will have somebody watching who will save the rants for us. So if there are any that come through, we'll get to them next week. But yeah, other than that, appreciate you guys. Hoping if you're watching live after the Lakeland event, I hope you had a good time. And I hope I didn't make a fool of myself. But Chris, thanks, man. I will catch you later.
Sounds good.